3, 2, 1.
Here we go! Welcome to Mad Gains Live. Today we are talking about CARB compliance. Now, everyone in the industry, doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter whether you're a shipper, a broker, or a trucker, you need to listen to this episode. You need to know what the heck CARB is because it impacts everybody in the country sooner or later. And a lot of people don't even know anything about it until they're in trouble. So I'm going to introduce one of my favorite people, Tom Bray. Tom, thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited to have you. And we have a lot to learn from you. You actually are from our today's sponsor, which is JJ Keller. And how about instead of me telling everybody what JJ Keller does, because I love JJ Keller, you already know that. How about what do you normally tell people that JJ Keller does?
What I tell people is we're a publishing and services company that can help you with any kind of compliance issues that you have. DOT is one of the big areas that we had covered that I work in. We also do OSHA and EPA and all kinds of compliance efforts that we can help you out with. That's what we do is whether it's help you directly with a consultant, provide you with materials that you need to study to learn things, whatever you need, we pretty much have it.
And is it for trucking companies, or do you also do for other companies as well?
For any type of business that has, they worry about DOT, OSHA, EPA, HR regulations, anything along those lines, we help them out.
I love it. And I know that I often, and I talk about this every time JJ Keller's on my show, when I go to your website, to JJ Keller's website, I mean, the resources are unbelievable. You can buy handbooks, you can buy, especially for attorneys, there's regulation books that I've lived and breathed by my whole career. So you guys are just knocking it out of the park with content. And I'm going to show everybody today why, because you're a perfect example of why, is because we need to talk about CARB. So question for you, how do you, like if you just had to take a shot in the dark of all trucking, our entire transportation industry, what percentage do you think even knows what CARB is? I'm just curious.
The percentage that has run into trouble with them is what.
And they're like, what did they do? Did they call you, Tom? And they're like, listen, I got this really weird ticket.
Yeah, either I'm in trouble for something I just did, and this outfit called CARB is bothering me, or somebody I know is now in trouble with CARB, and I want to get in trouble with CARB. So, what are they talking about? So that's the way it normally plays out. For carriers that operate in California regularly, they're familiar with CARB because at one time or another they did have the discussion with someone about them. So.
But it's the carriers who are not based out of California that are often like, what is this, Tom? And so let's start at the beginning. For people who are like, what in the world is CARB? What do we tell them?
Well, CARB is the California Air Resources Board, or if you're in California, just the Air Resources Board, because they don't say California if they're in California.
Yeah.
What they do is they are charged with controlling everything that comes into the air in the state of California. They've been around since the 60s. I mean, this isn't a new group. They changed names, but they've been around since the 60s. And their mandate is to make sure the air in California gets cleaned up, and they control what comes into it as part of their mandate. And that's where they get involved with the transportation industry. And
what did they do to our industry? Like, why does this impact our truckers and our shippers and our brokers?
As far as the truckers go, the impact that we feel directly is they're one of the agencies that it actually has to do with writing the emission standards. There's EPA writes the federal standards, California writes the CARB standards, and because of a longstanding agreement, you've got to meet the CARB standards if you're going to operate in California. That's whether you have a car, big truck, or otherwise. You've got to meet the California air standards if you're going to operate in California. So that's been around forever. The other thing that CARB does, which is unique, this is different than EPA, because with EPA and the rest of the country, your vehicle just needs to meet the emissions for the year that it was built. Right. And you got to maintain it that way. You got to make sure it keeps meeting those standards. California, what CARB does is once a vehicle reaches a certain age, it's got to be retrofitted as far as diesel vehicles over 14,000 pounds. So they've got a retrofit requirement to get those older vehicles cleaned up, basically, to get their emissions up to where they want them to be to try to keep the air clean. And by the way, it does work. I spent a lot of time in California in the 80s. you could never see across the LA basin. I don't care.
That's so true.
It was. Yeah. No.
And just so everybody knows, you were a truck driver for a long time, weren't you?
Yeah, it was many years, and West Coast was my stomping grounds. I ran mostly, so yeah.
And so, how old do these trucks? Like, what age are we talking about, and what needs to be retrofit?
Yeah, the retrofitting right now, anything 2005 and 6 model years have to have a diesel particulate filter. Those actually didn't show up on production trucks till 2007. So that's a retrofit to get them onto those 05s and 06s. Anything older than that, 2004 and older, it's got to be retrofitted with an engine that meets the 2010 emissions. And this is the tricky part. This is where a lot of people get in trouble. This isn't just for vehicles based in California. This is vehicles from. So if you're sending a truck from New York or from Wisconsin to California, it's got to meet those requirements as well. So if it's a 2005, it's going to have a diesel particulate filter on it. If it's a 1995, it's going to have a 2010 engine in it. So those standards apply to any vehicle operating in California, not just the ones based there.
And this is the moment that blows everybody's minds because, and this is why I tried to lead this episode by saying to everyone, and we're going to broaden this a little bit soon to talk about brokers and shippers. But I mean, if you are based in, like you said, Tennessee, and you've got a 2008 truck, and you're driving through California, you can get a ticket for being not in compliance. Is that correct? You're supposed to have a 2010 engine.
Yeah, well, if you have a 2008, you have to have your original diesel particulate filter on it and functioning. It's 2000. Like if you have 2005, which didn't come with a diesel particulate filter, that's the one you'd have to have that retrofitted onto it. And
how much are these filters?
Boy, it's been a long time since I priced one. I don't want to say that because somebody will call me saying you're way off.
You're way off. Okay, so let's just assume they're expensive. Like
expensive, yes.
Like should we say thousands or hundreds?
Thousands to get it all done. By the time you get it retrofitted, installed, working correctly, it's thousands. And the older vehicles, like I say, the 2004 and older heavy trucks need to have a 2010 engine. So you're talking about an entire engine change.
Can you believe these people sat around a table in California and they were like, let's just require all these truckers to just get new engines. We're tired of this. They just have to get new engines. And it's like, wow.
Well, being an old nuts and bolts guy, you tell me that I've got to take my, 1995 truck in and put a 2010 engine in it to send it to California. By the time I get done doing the math of what it's going to cost me to change that engine out and get the 2010 emissions package built into that chassis, I think I'm probably just going to go buy a newer truck, and that's probably
right.
When they were sitting around the table at CARB talking about things, I think that's kind of where they were aiming at. It's like, we'll just
force everybody to get newer trucks.
We'll just force you to buy a newer truck, one or the other. Yeah.
I wonder, you don't have to know the answer to this. This is just my brain thinking, because I think I was in law school during this time, but I wonder if they gave people like tax incentives maybe to get top gear their trucks. Yeah,
that's one thing that CARB does that's out there and available are different grant programs, different financial aid programs, loan programs.
That's good.
Companies do these things, so it's not like they strictly pass the rule and say you're 100% on your own. They have qualification requirements, but they do have things out there to help carriers.
I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't be surprised if they were like, you're on your own. There was a reason why people are running to Texas from California. Poor California. But I get the, one time, Tom, when you and I were talking about this, you brought up the example of like when you're driving behind a truck and a bunch of smoke comes out or a car. And like I literally hold my breath. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna get cancer. Don't forget, don't worry about all those bars I hung out with full of cigarette smoke when I was in my 20s. It's this one truck. Oh my God. But so I can see both sides. I can see how like the air that you do need to worry about a congested area and the air you're breathing. And then I can see the other side where it was like, oh my God, they got to have new engines.
Yeah, that's the whole thing is, to clean the air up. That's what their ultimate goal is. And the way you put it, with the black smoke coming out, everybody knew years ago that wasn't good for you, No,
come on, folks.
California, they collected a whole bunch of it, so they figured they had a problem with it, so they needed to do something. And they also at the federal level, they have trouble making the clean air standards, so which is the other reason why they're given a lot of latitude by EPA because of their geography and everything else that goes on. They have a hard time making the standards, so they've been given some extra latitude by EPA to get it done.
I love that you bring that up, because when I just graduated from law school and I started working at the law firm, and I worked with this really cool transportation lawyer, Jeff Simmons, and he told me about CARB, and I was like, no. We learned in law school that one of the most important parts of our legal system, of our federal system, and of our Constitution, is called interstate commerce. The founders wanted to make sure that each business can flow through the states, and that the states can't throw up barriers, all these different barriers, keeping people and shutting down business from state to state. So the first thing I popped up and told Jeff Simmons was, hey, that's against the federal commerce statutes, and having California being able to give a ticket to somebody from Tennessee that's simply driving through their state should be against the principles of interstate commerce. And he said, when I researched, I went nuts because I didn't believe him, because I was arrogant, and I still am. And I researched it, and it has been litigated over and over and over again. And yet, because California, like you said, they latched on to the coattails of the EPA law, and they were allowed to do this. And it's so interesting because people will call you, Tom, from a whole nother state and say, all I was doing was driving through California, and they tell me I need a different engine, and I don't even live there. I'm not based there. So do you know how much these tickets are, by the way? I can't remember.
The potential is thousands of dollars per day.
That's what I remember too.
The other thing that CARB is backwards compared to a lot of others, you look at the federal penalty standards, and the way they have it written is up to per day. What CARB has in their regulations, it's minimum per day. So they don't have the option of reducing it because you tried. They have the option of increasing it because you weren't trying.
Wow. And not to be, I have law enforcement in my family and everything, but if I was a cop, I'd be looking on the highway. If I was a highway cop, I'd just be looking for those older trucks, and I'd be like, "Oh, there you are, you Tennessee tags. I'm going to make my numbers today, and then go back to watching Netflix."
That's the nice thing. They only certain officers out there are given the authority to enforce that. So CARB has their own enforcement group. Some of the CH
they do
are authorized. Yeah, some of the
I didn't know that.
The district boards, regional boards have authority to enforce. So there's only certain people that do it. And you kind of mentioned one of the things they look at, and this is one of those ways to get in trouble in California, is you're blowing a whole bunch of black smoke up. They know their emission standards fairly well, and they know that, if you're running a diesel particulate filter, you should be way under, 5% soot. So, there should be almost nothing coming out of that where black stuff goes. So if you're covering the officer's windshield behind you with soot, he's probably going to pull you over and talk about it. So
are there any other states that have these types of rules that we all need to watch out for?
Yeah, the emission standards are pretty much standard across the country because EPA is nationwide, so that part of it's standard. And you get the different states. Texas has, emissions testing in certain areas, and they can do smog checking. Illinois, New Jersey, there's a lot of the states. Wisconsin does emissions testing in certain counties, but that's scheduled testing. So this isn't a new concept. What's new and different in California, or not new, it's been around a long time, is the retrofitting of the older vehicles and making those older vehicles and refrigeration units, because they're another diesel-powered piece of equipment, meet the more modern emission standards. And that's the difference. Is if you're in Wisconsin and you got to take your vehicle in for an emissions check, it just has to meet the standards for the year it was manufactured. If it's in California, it's got to be retrofitted and meet these newer standards. So that's what's different out there, and that applies to vehicles that come in from outside. Like you said, the guy from Tennessee coming in's got
that's wild.
That meets those standards. So
let's switch to go ahead.
I'd say they do other things too, and the one that always makes me chuckle is one of my buddies refers to them as the California skirts. If you look at a 53-foot box trailer, it's been set up to operate in California. It's going to have typically the underside aerodynamics. It's going to have the nose or tail aerodynamics, and the truck pulling it's going to have aerodynamics, and they're going to have the both units are going to have low rolling resistance tires. That's because the other thing that California does is they try to force manufacturers and carriers to run equipment that gets better fuel mileage, so there's less going into the air in the first place. As far as
interesting.
so the greenhouse gas rule, as it's called, which is the one that requires those aerodynamics on 53-foot trailers and the trucks pulling them. That's another one that applies to no matter where you operate from, which is why you see those trucks with as my friend calls them, the California skirts.
California skirts
run around all over the country because if it's going to go to California, it's got to be equipped to meet that. And that's one of the ones that's changing. California is looking at expanding that so it includes more trailers than just a 53-foot box type.
I wondered if that's what you were going to go next with that.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's and here again, in a way, a lot of carriers begrudgingly admit that actually wasn't a bad thing because they see a 4, 5, 6% gain in fuel mileage because making that box a lot more aerodynamic, improve fuel efficiency and fuel economy. So
I need to have a show on that one day because I know that right now there's some legislation that's been proposed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always a popular topic. It comes up like every 2 or 3 years on whether trucks should be required to have it from a safety and from a
right. Yeah. And California's looking at adding things like tire pressure monitoring, aerodynamics to vehicles that can accommodate it. Low rolling resistance tires on all trailers. So there's different things they're looking at doing that way. And here again, they're looking at next year starting to phase that in. And those manufacturing standards. So you're going to hear about the manufacturer saying it's going to cost X number of thousands of dollars more to buy a trailer.
Yeah, that's the thing about it. Like I love where we're going with this, and I want improvement, but at the same time, like trucking's already a really expensive industry.
Yeah, the trucks and trailers aren't cheap, and the more you hang up, the more expensive they get. So, but they've got those programs going on as well. So there's quite a bit going on with California, and it always is.
Yeah, there always is.
And I know where you're going to go next. You're going to talk about shippers and brokers, right?
You know it, because shippers and brokers are going to be like, oh, this is a carrier problem. No. This is a you problem too. And this, I think there was like a blitz back in 2014, if I remember, where CARB officials were like literally raiding brokers' offices in California and auditing them and giving them tickets for hiring carriers that were not in compliance with CARB. And I know that you don't even have to have an office in California if the CARB official sees that a broker or shipper has hired the carrier that's not in compliance with CARB. They can get a ticket as well. And I think that's also surprised companies that have hired these truckers. They're like, oh my God, I have to make sure they're in compliance? Yep. Yeah, you do.
That's another thing that's incredibly unique about CARB. It kind of harkens a little bit to the hazmat regulations where the shipper can be held liable for certain things.
Yep.
CARB kind of takes that approach where the company that dispatched, hired, brokered, whatever was involved in that movement, hired a carrier that wasn't compliant, you're liable just like the carrier is. So you've got as a shipper and broker, you've got to be careful about who you're bringing in as far as carriers to do your work in California, because if you're hauling into, out, over, through California and you're not meeting the CARB requirements, or I shouldn't say your carrier's not the one that you hired, you're liable just like the carrier is. So that's kind of a unique twist that like
it is. It's smart.
Aren't expecting it.
Yeah, it's smart though. They're making sure that this is enforced, and it does. A lot of brokers and shippers will come to me and say, "Well, how do I make sure I'm in compliance?" So what do you usually recommend? And oh, by the way, for those of you, I always try to make sure I say this on some of my episodes where we're giving advice and education, which is, Tom and I are not your attorney. We're not giving legal advice. It's just education. We're just sending you in the direction, and we're giving you an idea of what to do. You should always hire J.J. Keller or hire a lawyer to get more advice, because the facts, the state laws, what's going on, circumstantial, could make things different. So I just wanted to make sure people knew that before Tom dives in and gives us advice on how to stay compliant. Because I don't want somebody to come back and be like, Tom, you told me. No, this is just education, people. But go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, there's lots of things a shipper broker can do. One is California, like the truck and bus regulations, they have a database that the carriers can enter their information in, and then they can print out a compliance certificate saying that we're a compliant carrier. All of our equipment meets the standards. It's all newer than 2010, or, our 2007s and up all have DPF filters. Our 2006 and older either have a DPF or 2010. In other words, you can enter all that information in the database as a carrier. And then you print out the certificate to present the customers, as the carrier's customers, the brokers, the shippers, to show that, hey, we're a compliant fleet. We meet the CARB, and that does the due diligence part for the shipper and the broker then, because the carrier assured us that they are compliant. The carrier, you can ask your carrier outright, what's the age of your equipment? Well, they say we have is 3 years or newer. Not an issue. That they're
right.
They're pretty much there, because everything, whether it be the truck and bus regulation, the TRU, the refrigeration regulations, or the greenhouse gas, anything built in the last few years is going to be compliant. So, you're there, get something from them. Another thing that you'll see shippers and brokers wording language into their contracts, that be compliant with, and you're the lawyer, so you're probably really familiar with
yes, very familiar.
And then the other thing, there's just different things that you can look at, like with a refrigeration unit based out of California. If it's based in California, it's going to have an ARB number, ARB ID number right on it. So that carrier's putting forth the effort. They're complying because they've got their equipment registered with CARB. Because reefer units based in California have to be registered, and you have to have an ARB number on them. So that's a quick visual thing you can look at. A California-based carrier pulling a refrigerator trailer, there's no ARB number on it. That should be curious. What's he up to here? Could be an out-of-state trailer that he's bringing in. Okay, well, what year is it? Is it new enough, or is it old enough it needs to be retrofitted? Because, you got those questions asked. So that's, I don't like to use this term, but that's kind of like the common sense aspect of it.
Yeah, makes sense.
And the truck shows up and it's old and smoking, and it's got a reefer that looks like it, got dragged across the Atlantic Ocean with the Mayflower. I'm going to ask a few questions.
I have seen those on the road, and I've been like, I hope I'm not eating whatever's in them, even though I'll eat whatever, please. So what I hear is there's a database, and I wrote this all down. I always do this when you're on the show. I'm always writing stuff down. So there's a database. You can go on there and check and see if the carrier's on the database. And you can the carrier can print it and give it to you. However, I still check with online databases.
It's not going to hurt you any, right?
No. And
there's a list of, when you go in there, there's a list of 100% compliant carriers.
Yeah, so it's easy.
Yeah.
And for carriers who are not based in California, you ask, like you said, what's the age of your equipment? What type of equipment you have? Because if they're driving through California, but they're not based in California, they can still get in trouble. You can still get a ticket, brokers and shippers. Add language in contracts, which is a great idea. It's recommended. You will see it unilaterally across the industry. There's standard, you can Google it, and there's standard CARB language you can add to your contracts with carriers. And then the reefer units will have ARB numbers right on them if they're purchased in California.
If they're based in California.
Or if they're based in California. The other pieces too is I always encourage my clients to document all the steps you have taken to use your best efforts. We're not, you're doing this to this is when you get a ticket, or at least back in the day. It could be a little bit different because I haven't been involved in those tickets in a long time. But if you get a ticket for a CARB violation as a broker or as a shipper or whatever, dispatcher, you want to demonstrate to the judge that I did the best I could. And if you document all these efforts and you have consistently repeated them like every year or something for each carrier, then I think that's good. Is there anything else I'm missing, Tom?
No, that would be the main thing is do your due diligence as a shipper or broker. Get with your carrier and find out, and to me, the one question is, are you CARB compliant? And if their question is if their answer back is who's CARB,
you're like, ooh.
Maybe we have something to worry about here, so that's a good way to start the discussion. Are you CARB compliant if you're dispatching to or through California,
Yeah.
And just start that conversation with them, and then do your due diligence. Are your vehicles newer? What model year are all your vehicles and such forth and so on. And as you mentioned, whether it's a CARB administrative hearing or a regular court, if you can show that you've done your due diligence, you're probably going to be okay at the end of the day.
Yeah,
If you
probably will
say and just say, "Oh, we always do that," well, okay, that's nice, but prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing written down anywhere saying anything.
Yeah.
It's gonna
And you can't just be like, oh, I asked the carrier and the carrier said yes, and I thought that was good. No, like take a couple extra steps, do some of the stuff that Tom said, and put it into your TMS and the carrier's notes and attach the screenshots. That way you have everything. And if a carrier has a older vehicle, I guess the engine would be older than 2010, or the filter is older than 2007, right?
It's older than 2007, doesn't have a DPF. Yeah, you got to verify with them. Are those vehicles retrofitted?
And then if they're not, those are not the best carriers to use for the shipment going through California.
No.
In fact, I would say maybe not OTR either. Maybe you should just keep them local.
Well, keep them out of California anyways. That's going to be the big thing.
Just keep them out of California, folks.
You get them in California, they're going to get in trouble. And then when they get in trouble, you're going to get in trouble.
You're going to get in trouble.
So that's the whole concept that CARB, does that portion of their program under is, the carrier's in trouble because they're the one that ran the non-compliant truck in there. You're the one that's going to be in trouble because you put them in a position to go there. So
it's true. We're all playing a part in this. Is there anything else that people need to know about CARB that you and I haven't talked about yet?
No, and we've touched on all of them. They have all kinds of programs going on, but as far as for the on-highway, for the heavy-duty truck market, those are the big ones. The big one is the truck and bus, and the one thing I always like to talk to mention when we're talking about this with California, you're only in trouble if you've got the older equipment. I mean, if you're running, modern equipment, your typical fleet running a 3 to 5 year trade cycle, and you're running your reefer units 5, 6, 10 years, they might have a little trouble with some of those older units, so they're older than 7 years. But if you're running newer equipment, it's not going to be a big issue for you.
Right. It shouldn't be.
Older stuff that needs retrofitted, then you really do need to be aware of what the rules are, what's going on with them. But so that's kind of like the first thing I was mentioning when someone gets exposed to CARB. And because all the people calling me in a panic, oh my word, I've got to go to California. And I heard this CARB thing. They write fines for $100,000 just because they don't like you and all this other stuff. And my first question would be, well, how old's your fleet? Well, our oldest trucks are about 3 years old. You're okay. You're fine.
Yeah, you're fine.
As long as nobody's tampered with the emissions equipment on it, you're going to be good. That's because you're not in a category where CARB is going to take an extra look at you. So.
Well, for those of you listening, you can look up Tom Bray on LinkedIn. You can look up JJ Keller on their website. They have tons of information on CARB and other regulations. Basically, anything you need to know, just go to their website. They got lots of stuff, or call their consultants for help with these things. Tom, thank you for joining us. I really, really appreciate this. Once again, you've brought us just gold education that we really need.
Always glad to do it.